Well, hello, and thank you for attending tonight's session of the Parenting Teens webinar series, How to Help Your Transgender Teen Thrive. My name is Celeste Kramer. I'm the Development Director at Inspire School of Arts and Sciences. Inspire School of Arts and Sciences is a tuition-free public charter high school in Chico, California, that specializes in helping students pursue careers in the arts and sciences. Enrollment at Inspire is open, and you are welcome to join our family by applying at inspirechico.org. The Parenting Teens Educational Series is a series of talks and panels aimed at supporting families in talking on challenging topics. Each of these webinars includes a 1-hour presentation, give or take some, and Q&A with parents, local experts, or educators. We are covering a range of topics from tonight's session on supporting transgender teens, to helping teens engage in constructive social discourse, to helping teens deal with trauma and crisis, to fostering a healthy transition from middle to high school, and building positive mental health. We record each session and upload them to our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and our website. So if you miss a session and you're eager to watch it, please visit one of those forums to watch them or share them with others. We are hopeful that this series sheds some light on these issues and makes it easier to start critical conversations with the teens in your life. And I'm proud to introduce today's session and panelists. The presence of supportive adults in the LGBTQ plus teens' lives can make an incredible difference in their mental health and well-being. That's why it's important for all of us to create safe and affirming spaces for the teens in our lives to be who they are. Tonight, you will learn skills and tools from experts in the field for offering support and acceptance to teens who identify as transgender or are questioning their gender identity, including some of the risks facing transgender teens who do not have affirming adults in their lives. You will also hear firsthand experiences and advice from parents of transgender teens. I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves and what they bring to the important conversation, and then we'll jump into a series of questions and shed some light on how we can create safer spaces. I want to thank each of you for taking your time to be with us. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat or in the question and answer, and we'll get to them. So panelists, thank you for being here. Please introduce yourselves, tell us about your background in the area of transgender and LGBTQ plus inclusion, and why you think today's topic is important for parents of teens. So Julie, do you want to start?
Yeah, great. Hi, my name is Julie Nilsson. I'm really happy to be here and be part of this group, part of this very important discussion about affirming your kids' identity and making sure that they have a safe space. That's safety, safety, safety. So important. I come to you as a parent of 3 kids. My youngest is transgender, which is why I'm part of this group. And she is a junior at Inspire. And I am a retired teacher. I'm also part-time manager, property manager. And I do some volunteering in town as well through Stonewall, a supportive group for parents of kids who are in the LGBTQ community. And I've learned a lot from people I've worked with, other panelists here, Erin and Andy and Cindy, as well as other folks in town. And I'm just really happy to be here. So thanks for joining us.
Great.
I think I'm next. My name is Erin Whitney, and I'm the faculty member in the School of Education at Chico State. My background is in special education, and so I taught, K through 12 special education for about 18 years before becoming a teacher educator. And my interest in supporting LGBTQ plus and transgender, including transgender teens, really comes out of just a desire for inclusive practices in schools and seeing the power of acceptance and what can happen when we really do support our teens in school. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'm excited to be here and share some of my own research and interest in this topic. Thank you.
So I am Cindy Pickett. I am an ordinary mom with 2 kids, and they're both both adults now. Our youngest came out as a teenager, and he is now thriving, about to graduate from college, doing great. When we started this journey, I knew very little about any of this world and what I could expect and what I needed to know. And so gradually over time got involved with Stonewall right away, and participated in a parent support group, asked a lot of questions, did a lot of reading, and just really learned along the way on what I needed to do to help my own child thrive. You know, after learning all that and kind of getting settled into this new reality that was ours, felt like we wanted to give back to the Stonewall community. So we did get involved in helping to facilitate a parent group. We work with Julie on that. And it's been a tremendously rewarding experience to take what we learned and to help other parents navigate those early times. I think it's really an important conversation that we're having tonight, because some of you who are listening and participating may have children of your own who are questioning their gender, or who are already transitioning at some stage or another. And chances are, if you don't already have a child, they've got one friend or another who will be on the spectrum somewhere. So your life will intersect with a transgender teen, and you might not even know it yet, but it's happening. So the more we know, the more we can provide more and more safe spaces for these kids, so that they can deal with being a teenager and know that they're loved and supported for who they are.
And I'm Andy Pickett, the other half of this combination. And for me, in addition to what Cindy said, the expansion that I've had in learning from other parents has been tremendous, both fulfilling for me personally and understanding a larger community better. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. This is such an important topic. So to get us started, some of our participants tonight may not know what the term transgender encompasses. Julie, can you offer a definition to help frame tonight's discussion?
Yeah, I can. Transgender is an umbrella term to describe people whose gender is not the same as, or perhaps does not align with or sit comfortably with the sex they were assigned at birth. Trans people may use other terms to describe themselves, but the transgender term itself is sort of like, if you could imagine that umbrella, and then there's various terms that they may choose to use to describe their expression, their identity, how they want to be, what term they want to use. So if anybody else want to jump in with adding to that?
I can add a little bit, some examples of other identity descriptors that people might use might be non-binary, gender expansive, you know, trans can include people who maybe aren't necessarily wanting to switch from, you know, what we think of as one gender to the other, but may kind of be existing in and identifying with, you know, as in between kind of place, or, you know, another descriptor. There are many descriptors that people might use to describe themselves and their gender identities.
And I'll add one more thing. Julie used the term gender assigned at birth, and there's a larger concept here that when I started learning about transgender issues, I lacked the vocabulary to properly express myself or to properly understand some concepts, and this is one that gender assigned at birth is one that I didn't know, and I learned it, and it makes sense now, and that really there's various ways that are used to describe this concept, but the best one that applies is when a baby is born and whoever delivers the baby looks at the genitalia and says it's a boy or it's a girl. It's that moment right there where we say that the gender was assigned at birth. So it's a great way of explaining without going into some other terms that may not necessarily be comfortable to everybody.
I think another term that's important to know is cisgender. which means when a person's sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. So you may hear students talk about, being cisgender or transgender.
Great, thank you. Erin, this next question is for you. What does the research tell us about the importance of creating safe and supportive spaces for transgender teens?
Yeah, in the chat, I'm gonna put a link of a summary of some of the research on supporting trans youth. And what we really know is, well, first I'll talk about what happens when students are not supported. And because we have a ton of data on this, and kind of starting with the Trevor Project, they do annual surveys on LGBTQ youth and mental health. So we know that there are very negative impacts on mental health in trans youth when they are not supported. For example, 40%, this is from the Trevor Project latest survey, 40% of LGBTQ respondents seriously considered attempting suicide in the past 12 months. And more than half of transgender and non-binary youth had seriously considered suicide. There's more data provided by the pediatrics publication that stated that nearly 14% of adolescents reported a previous suicide attempt. And then they break down disparities by gender identity and suicide attempts. And they found that female to male adolescents, trans adolescents, reported the highest rate of attempted suicide at 50%, followed by adolescents who identified as not exclusively male or female, so non-binary, 41%, male to female adolescents, about 30%, questioning 28%, and then this compared with cisgender female adolescents with 17%. Still, we don't want that kind of suicide attempt rate, but still a much lower number, and male adolescents about 9%. So there's a huge disparity there. We also know that LGBTQ youth have experienced homelessness, being kicked out of the house, or have run away. And then within the school setting, GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, also does climate surveys, and they have found much higher levels of harassment, bullying, students feeling unsafe at school, which of course leads to lower achievement, lower attendance, higher dropout rate, and this has huge impacts in later life success. But the positive is what happens when kids are supported. And that's why we're here today. And that's why we want to send this strong message of support. Christina Olson did an extensive project called the Trans Youth Project, which is still in progress. She's out of University of Washington and now is at Princeton University. And she wrote a report on the mental health of transgender children who are supported in their identities, and found that the students who were in families that they were allowed to dress and act according to their preferred gender did incredibly well, and their self-esteem was very high, and that they were no more likely to be depressed than cisgender kids, and they experienced only slightly higher levels of anxiety. So, when these students were supported, the problem isn't the mental health inherently in trans kids, it's the way that people respond to them. And then just a couple more pieces of data. The American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a statement, which is linked here in this document. And they basically found that there's no evidence of higher risk for mental health just because somebody's trans, but it's because of the negative impact of not being accepted. So they call for gender affirmative care that really honors and respects, people's gender identities, knowing that we have better mental health outcomes when we are supportive.
Wow. Thank you, Erin. This conversation is so important. Clearly.
It is very important.
So if I may comment on this, when our child first told us that he was transgender, my initial reaction was shock, and then because I really didn't know a whole lot about transgender issues, I went to worst case scenario in my mind and thought, this is a horrible life for him. I have to do everything in my power to convince him that he's not. And that's where my mind initially went, because I wanted to protect him, from, I wanted to have the same kind of life as I have, and that was incompatible. So when I started doing some research and I ran into those statistics that Erin just read, it floored me. It absolutely floored me, and it was a wake-up call for me that rather than trying to project my future on my son and try and correct that for a possible difficult future, I was in fact endangering his life by acting that way. I was literally, by my initial reaction, causing the very thing that I wanted to prevent. So I had to do a complete 180 on my approach and start with, all right, I support you, and then we'll work through this together and we'll figure this out together. But right away, that was a conclusion that I came to immediately, because this is heavy. This is a reality, and it's a reality that has a very good outcome if you just flip it around.
Well, that is a perfect segue into our next question, because several of you are parents of a teen who identifies as transgender. What was it like for you when your teen came out to you? What were some of your initial reactions, which you kind of touched on, Andy? And what are some typical reactions that parents may have to a child that's coming out?
Well, in my situation, when my child came out, she was 9, so she wasn't a teen. So I'm not really going to speak to that teen question, but I've spoken to many adults whose kids were teens, and I've been to the Gender Spectrum Conference down in Orinda a few years in a row, and listened to quite a few parents who were super perplexed at the various ages. Some kids that come out at 12, some at 18, some at 20, some at, it just ranges. There is no right number or correct number or expected number. It's when that person feels safe. And my daughter taught me that, because in 3rd grade was when she really said to me, my dream is to be a girl. Well, I am a girl, but my dream is to be a girl in the world. And my reaction was kind of a mix of relief and absolute worry, because I hadn't done the research. I had read that research that Erin talked about, but I had done enough to know. I had done enough, just a little bit, and enough reading to know this was going to be quite a journey. And we set up to even change schools, because again, so much has changed in 8 or 9 years that, well, this was 7 years ago. The principal really said it's probably safer to transition and come to school as a girl at another school. If that happened today, I don't think, well, it depends on which state and county and everywhere you're at, but right today, if that happened, I would not follow that same advice. But we did. We went to a different school, set up the whole summer, ready to go. First day of school, my daughter decided, nope, going back to a male. Literally went back into her room, changed her clothes, came back out, going to school as a boy. So my timeline was not working. I had set this all up perfectly to work, but guess what? It didn't work. And it took me a few weeks to realize that she needed to find out that if this new environment was going to be safe. And it was her call, not mine. Absolutely not mine. So I learned so much from her bravery and her courage, and watching her find out what's going to work for her. And in October, she decided one day she just was ready. It was picture day. She wanted to make sure that picture that was going to be on our wall from then on, and in photo albums, was going to represent who she was. It was her decision. And our job at that point was to inform the school, inform parents, and just make sure we could do as much to provide, especially because she was 9, a clean, supportive segue. And I guess in a sense, kind of put out any fires that came in front so we could figure out how she could continue on with her education and be in school and be attentive and be healthy and play on the playground and be a kid, just be a kid at school. So my reaction, I guess, I knew what was coming. For me, that was my personal reaction, but I've heard from other people that they are floored. And I think one thing that I find, and you can see that in this group right here, is find support, find a group, find Stonewall, find an online group, get people who understand and support, because the other voices and the other naysayers and people who question and judge, they're not going to help your child's mental health. They're not going to help your mental health. And the support is essential at that time for everybody.
Yeah.
So in our case, or I'll speak from my experience with our child. He started, it was a little bit gradual. There wasn't just a aha moment, but it was a little bit gradual in the way, the way he dressed, the way he presented, length of hair, the friendship groups changed a little bit. So there was a little bit of warning. Now, I had never really considered that he might be under this transgender umbrella. I personally was only familiar with the labels of, gay or lesbian. I didn't have a lot of personal experience, but as I realized that this might be a reality, I tried to do some reading, but I was woefully slow to keep up with with where he was headed. At some point, he did come out formally and was still kind of at the questioning stage. So even at the very beginning, after he came out, there was a need in me. I'm really a black and white thinker, and there was a need in me to put a label on it so that I could read a book about it and ask questions about that and figure it out. And it wasn't really our experience on how that worked. It was really, really difficult for me to step back and give that forum for him to figure out who he was and where he was headed, and then try to keep up. It was difficult for me not to have a touchstone, have a label to work with. It was difficult as he went through the different stages of self-discovery. It was really wrenching to give up the name he was given at birth, because he chose to change the name he wanted to be called. I mourned the loss of that name because I had pinned it to that child and to the imagined future that I had for that child. I probably went through, they talk about, sometimes they equate this experience to going through the stages of grief. And I have to say, for me, that was my experience. I was angry, I was sad, I was frustrated, I grieved, I bargained, all the different stages that I went through in trying to grasp my role in how I could help him thrive. I felt at times like I was leading a double life. Before he was out in public, he was just out within our inner circle. You'll find sometimes that your life becomes this series of concentric circles. And so it was difficult to me sometimes to know, like, who are you in this group of people? But I learned to catch up. I learned to take clues from him. Sometimes I would ask him directly, what can I do? What is tonight going to look like? So that I was supportive of what he wanted in that given moment. So, I have to say that the roller coaster of emotion was pretty overwhelming, and that it was critical for me to find other parents, especially other moms, to talk it out and to be able to laugh together and cry together and all of the above. So my suggestion in this whole thing is that you need to validate the emotions that you're going through because they are valid.
Yeah, I didn't think about going through that grief process, but that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, and I bet it helps people to hear that that's okay that you're feeling that way. One of the things that is very crucial to supporting a transgender teen or anyone who's transgender is using their preferred pronouns. Erin, can you explain why it's so important for parents of transgender teens to use the correct pronouns and how to have that conversation about pronouns with the teen who identifies as transgender?
Sure. And, you know, and I want to acknowledge that it can be hard to change the pronouns that you're using for somebody and their name. And it can take time and people might make mistakes. But it's not about being perfect. It's about really putting in your best effort. Just to go back to some of the data, the Trevor Project found that when trans and non-binary youth had their pronouns respected, there was a decrease in suicidality. So it can make that big of a difference. And it's really just about validating and supporting who somebody is. I mean, everybody wants to be called by the name that they own, that they feel is, you know, the name that represents their identity. And, you know, if that's not done, it's like a dismissal of that person's being. So it's really important. And just a note on pronouns, you know, some people use he, she, or I'm sorry, he, him, some people use she, her, and some people use they, them. And, you know, it can be, some people have a hard time with understanding they, them for somebody who's non-binary, but it's something you get used to. And Merriam-Webster recently acknowledged they, them as a third person pronoun. So it's actually in the dictionary now that it's a valid third person pronoun. And we use it all the time. You know, if somebody leaves an umbrella on a table and you are asking, you know, who it belongs to, oh, they left their umbrella. That's, you know, they hopefully they'll come back for it. You know, if you don't know, then you know, you use they, them. So it can be hard for people at first, but you know, it makes a huge difference. So it's very important.
One of the tricks that I have heard about can someone talk about that? Like the dad who wanted to wear, like, imagine their son had a mouse in his pocket so he could constantly remind himself to say they to his son instead of he. And I thought, that's genius. So he just constantly thought his son had a little mouse in his pocket, so he's going to say they until he could get it down himself. And I was like, wow, that's awesome. That's a great little trick.
Good idea.
You know, those tricks, Cindy and I used to practice when we were alone. We'd sit at the dinner table by ourselves when he wasn't around, and literally practice saying the pronoun and the name so that it would start to feel more normal, because it can be tough. It can be difficult to change midstream. So yeah.
And then it's at the point, right, where it's just completely natural. Does it feel really natural? Yeah.
Yeah. After some time it does. And this is like an interesting point that I found, that with our son and a lot of his friends, when they switch pronouns, it's common to make mistakes. And the one of the things that I found is very, very much, I don't make a big deal out of making a mistake. Just correct it and move on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like if you use the wrong one, it's like I mean him, and then just keep going. You know, don't dwell on it. That's very, very common with the kids. Like, stop making a big deal of it.
Yeah. And if there's a group of kids, and perhaps there's a kid or two or an adult that you're not quite sure, you could start with yourself and say, I'm Julie, I use she, her. And then that may seem a bit formal, but sometimes gatherings are more formal. And then that way that gives everybody a chance to self-identify, use their name, pronoun. And so one person isn't being, you know, pointed out. And I also remember with my daughter, when someone would say he or her, I know the term dead name, her past name, she just it's almost like she just had, earplugs on. And then they would correct themselves. Like you said, Andy, they would go, I'm sorry. And then they'd say she, and then her name. And she'd go, yeah. And so she just kind of trained other people. Like, I'm not going to respond to that. I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to walk away. I'll just wait. And then when you said it, she was there. So she helped us. It was kind of interesting now that I think about that. But yeah, I think it's real important not to make a big deal out of it. I've done that before with a friend who uses they, and it's now I'm fine with it, but I worked hard at it. And I think that's real important when someone says, well, the they or he, it doesn't really work with me. And my response sometimes is, well, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about how that person wants to be identified. And if it's going to take you a day or two, or maybe 20 minutes of really working it, that's what you do. Because the person comes before the grammar or the discomfort. Their sense of self comes first. And I think if we just remember that, we'll get there. And you will make a mistake, or maybe a few, and that's okay, but you'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you point out to people the statistics behind just using the correct pronouns and what difference that makes in someone's mental health. Like, I like what you said, Julie, like, it's not about you. Mm-hmm. It's about them. And that's how we need to, that's a beautiful way of thinking about it. Mm-hmm. That we can get past our own discomfort, yeah, for someone else and have that compassion. Mm-hmm. What are some of the key questions parents and supportive adults can ask transgender teens through their coming out process?
I can start on that. Pronouns is first. I actually asked my daughter this. I cheated. I had her do my work for me. And she said pronouns and name. Just get that right. That's how we all go through the world, is with our name and our pronouns. She also talked about wardrobe, hair, being supportive enough even though you really don't get it. She said please just act like you get it. Even if you're still figuring it out and you yourself as an adult are kind of struggling in a way, let your child know that or the teen know that you're getting it, you're on your way. So the other thing that she said is to ask about how you can support your child out in the world, out in public, whether it's school or clubs or sports or church. Say, how can I help you with this situation, especially if they've just come out and it's the first time they're going to practice, or first time we're going to church, or first time we're going wherever. How can I help you? Well, how do you want to do this? You tell me. I learned that my plan was never really the right one. And as parents, we like to lead, we like to protect, we like to show them. And in this situation, we really have to take a back seat with that and ask them, how do you want me to go about doing this? Do you want me to call teachers? Do you want me to talk to admin? Do you want me to go talk to your guitar teacher? Those sorts of things. Also, just like, what's important to you? What right now is important to you? Is changing your name something that's important? Is getting your hair dyed important? Is getting the right shoes important? I mean, it's a day-to-day thing for a while. And those days are important to be validated and to be seen and shown that you get it. You are with them right then and there. What do they need right now? I mean, some things you can't do. Like my daughter always wanted to go shopping. I was like, well, okay, we have to budget. But that was important to her. The identity, the visual, the clothing, the hair, that was super, super important. So just checking in, what's important to you? The name change is an interesting one. I understand that the name change, legal name change, has become much easier these days. When we did it a few years back before, well, she's still a minor, it was a struggle. There was a lot of steps, so that's become a lot easier. And that may be something that's important and it may not be something that's important right then. It's just, again, it's the day-to-day check-in, maybe week-to-week check-in, and then listening. What can you do to help support them about what they're asking for?
Wow, that's great. Does anyone else want to add anything, or?
I'll add a couple of things. One I sort of stumbled on, which was trying to keep up with our son's friends, particularly as his peers shifted and into kids that I didn't really know, was to ask the name and what pronouns they use. Because I was initially curious because I didn't know how to address them. So I realized that by doing so, I normalized the concept of it's important to have your own pronouns. So I sort of stumbled onto that one. And then once I realized that that was an important one, then I started building that in on purpose, even though I may already know the pronouns that they use. But just a little nod to that. Yeah, this is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think another big area that can come up, especially right in the beginning, is asking your team, like, what would you like other people to know? Who would you like to know? How would you like to tell them? What about an extended family? What about, your coach, your teacher, your neighbors? There are, you learn about all the different people that you interact with, and they're sort of, they come in groups to some extent, so at what point are you comfortable sharing with immediate family or extended family, or, so some kids are like, I don't want to think about it, tell whoever you want, and some are very reserved about it. And I found in talking with our son and through our experience that it's important to let them lead the way to some degree on when they're ready and what forum they want. Do they want you to send an email? Do they want, do they want to have personal phone calls with grandma and grandpa, and then, so each family dynamic is very different. Each family experience is very different. But that can be a big sensitive area, and it can be really difficult as a parent if your child is not ready to come out to extended groups to maintain that honor and honor that privacy. Because it can be super uncomfortable to live what feels like a double life. It doesn't last forever. So honoring your child's journey in that way and asking, those kinds of questions, I think, can be really helpful.
And one last thing for me is the remembering that the gender issues with the kid is not the only thing going on in their lives. By the time that they loop you in, they've already been thinking about it for days, weeks, months, even years. So they are way ahead of you on their understanding. So while you may be, when you learn about this, you may be just trying to learn everything you can, and it's great to do this together with the kid and all that we're talking about. Also remember to ask them what bands they like, what music they're listening to, just normal kid stuff, because gender is not the only thing going on with them.
Right.
Yeah, so just continue to be a parent, blending in everything that you normally would.
That is really good advice.
That's a great point, Andy. And I was also thinking about, here we are a year into kids being at home. And if you've got a teen at home who is struggling with this, and I mean, there's just enough struggles as it is without other things coming into play. But having a supportive parents, if there's two parents in the household, great. But a supportive parent is crucial, and that just checking in daily. And I like that, Andy, what you said about. Okay, like sometimes my daughter will say, I don't want to do any trans talk. Let's just, we're not doing that, Mom. Like if I have an issue or a question, and so it's become sort of like a one of many subjects, one of many things to talk about. But during this time, I can't help but think how important that is for you as a parent or grandparent or guardian to check in. just check in. So they know you're there, you're connecting, you see them, you understand them, you're calling them by the right name, the right pronoun.
Mm-hmm. And then what kind of support is available for parents of transgender teens? And how would you recommend accessing that support?
So I made another list that I can share. I know everybody has a lot to share here, but I do want to share a list of resources because there are just so many. We're so fortunate that there are so many resources. So on the list that I've shared in the chat, I have our contact information. So, you know, I think any of us would be happy to provide resources. Stonewall is amazing. They have a ton of resources, support groups, all kinds of information. And then I've got some other links here for UCSF has a child and adolescent gender care gender center clinic. And then there are just so many national resources. So Gender Spectrum, which Julie referenced earlier, Human Rights Campaign, GLSEN, Trans Student Educational Resources, PFLAG, Transgender Law Center. There are just so many. And then I've also got a couple of lists of places to find books. As an educator, I'm always using, you know, books to teach, and there are just so many books for parents to help them understand, you know, what this is all about and what their children might be experiencing and how to be a supportive parent. And there are wonderful books for teens and for children that, you know, have protagonists that are trans or, you know, just have all sorts of experiences. So those are really helpful. And then I also have a link there to some of the California laws. This could be a much longer webinar. There's just so much to address and cover, but this is just, it has all the links there for you for, you know, accessing more information and resources.
Great. And then some of you and are educators. Julie, can you share some ways that high schools and organizations can work to be more inclusive of transgender teens, maybe if not as parents, but as educators?
Yes, I can. And Erin, I know, will help out with this. If the schools, more and more schools, especially in California, staff and teachers are getting trained through Stonewall, different organizations, how to support LGBTQ students on their campuses. So number one is having trainings and awareness for everybody on staff so that there's a common language, there's a common understanding, there's information. So that's a huge thing to do. I'm happy that in Chico Unified here, we have done lots of trainings and we still have some more to go. And we have been working with Stonewall, and we've gone out of county as well, but a lot in Chico Unified. So that's a great start. There's a lot of reception and questions and understanding, and people attending our trainings and attending them more than once. And a lot of times it has to do with students in their classroom that once it becomes something tangible to them, they really want more information and understanding. So that's a huge piece is training. And for teachers, I think communicating and being an inclusive classroom, you know, communicating to their students that they honor inclusivity, whether it be trans kids, kids of different religions, kids of, you know, just all their students. It's inclusivity, and that can be communicated through talking about it, lessons. Erin had mentioned books. There's tons of resources with curriculum. GLSEN is one. There's a lot, and you could post things in your classroom. Honor people who are from the LGBT community through literature, movies, curriculum. That's more and more becoming incorporated into curriculum, but it has a ways to go. So it does take initiative from the teacher to do that. Erin, what else can you tap into that.
Yeah, just to build on that, there's something called the FAIR Act in the state of California, which really encourages and actually mandates teachers to represent all people of all different experiences in their classroom and the curriculum that they're using. Also thinking about language use and being cautious about how you address students, you know, rather than saying boys and girls. Find some other creative ways to, you know, sort kids into groups, you know, try to avoid using such binary kind of gender terms to address or refer to students, can send a strong message.
Yeah, thanks for, that's a great reminder about that, because that brought up the issue about bullying and excluding kids. And we just stressed in our trainings how important that is to name that and to hold those kids accountable and to follow through, and not in the sense of punishing, because we're not, that's not what we're promoting. We're promoting education and understanding and inclusivity, but it has to be intentional. And oftentimes students will just, they're just reflecting or mimicking what they hear elsewhere at home, or they don't understand. It's a lot of it just has to do with the lack of education, but it has to be, the kids have to be held responsible for that improper language or bullying or harassment in order to show all students that they're protected on their campuses. It's not just about a trans student, it's about every student. So that, so I start off with safety. Safety is my big thing. It's about safety of everybody, and feeling safe coming to school, feeling safe speaking your mind, feeling seen, feeling safe in the sense that I know that the administrator, the teacher, the people in charge understand me and are going to support me, all students.
One of the things that I heard one time that really resonated with me was that the LGBT community scans rooms and scans environments for safety. And so even just looking at a classroom and asking, are all people represented here? Like if I was to walk in, would I see myself? Would I see a rainbow flag? Would I see a transgender, you know, flag? Would I see people of the same sex? Or, you know, and I thought, ooh, almost everybody could be looking around to see, if I walked in here, you know, what would I see? How would I feel if I was someone who was transgender? And I thought that was really interesting, that to make sure that there's something in the room too, and that everyone's being represented within that space. So
at the trainings we have the gender unicorn, and it's that rainbow pictograph in a sense, and we talked about having administrators, counselors, teachers, classrooms, just having them up. And again, because like you said, Celeste, and I know my daughter does it all the time, what's going on here? What's the vibe? Who's part of this room? Who's not? And we talked about it with an administrator who questioned, I teach elementary, what first or second grader or third grader is going to talk to me about that? Why would I have that up? And later on we heard that he did put it up. Kudos to him. And he did have a little first grader look over and say, what's that? Or I know about that. And he said it turned out to be a great discussion about, you know, people's identity and how they express themselves and who they love. And I thought that student knows now that school, that person, that principal is a safe space. Maybe they have a person at home who's part of the LGBT community, and that those colors rang to him or her. And then it also taught me too that administrator now knows what a connector that is, that we adults see when kids respond to that, oh, we do need those. This proves to them that we are a safe space for them.
great.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we have a picture of it on the handout, so people can refer to that.
I also think it's important to bring up that even if your own children are not transgender or not LGBTQ, it's really important as parents of children that are straight to also educate them. Like, we don't have to wait for it to be in the classroom or for them to have a friend, but we have all sorts of conversations at dinner about how would that feel? How would that feel if you didn't, if you were going to transition? How do you think that would feel if you were having to share a bathroom? Or we come up all these different situations so that they can put themselves in their shoes, because it's important for us to create a community that's supportive, and it's not just the kids that are transgender that have to go through, you know, it's those of us raising straight kids that need to understand like what people might go through, be compassionate and put themselves in, and how could they make someone feel safe. Question that I always ask my student or my kids is, if you saw something like someone being bullied for that, what would you do? Because I want them to think about it. I want them to not just be a passing and ignore things. I want them to step up and be helpful and supportive and create that safe environment. So I'm just throwing that out there in case we have people want to think about that too. So in closing, because we're almost on the hour, what kind of advice do each of you have for a parent whose teen identifies as transgender that we haven't already talked about? Anything?
I would say listen. Just you know, ask questions, but maybe not too many questions. Just listen.
I have like your child's experience is your child's lived experience is not necessarily your lived experience. So trust their inner compass and kind of follow their lead. It doesn't cost money or anything to call them by a name and a pronoun that they want. And as we've heard tonight, it makes such a huge difference. And it's just when you reach out in that way of support by calling them a pronoun or a new name that they want to be called, and you see their positive reaction, it will feed your heart and you'll want to do more to get that look of love and gratitude on their face. The other thing, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is be kind to yourself. You are going to experience lots of different emotions at different times, and all of those are valid. I asked our son tonight what I could include that we did wrong, that we did right, that he wishes he had told us. And the one thing that he came forward with was that he appreciated when, as his mother, I showed some vulnerability. When I was willing to let him know that I was trying as best as I could, that I didn't understand this or that, and would he teach me? So I think, and he even mentioned this, that there is a fine balance between showing too much raw emotion and holding everything inside. So you'll need to find that comfortable balance with your child, but above all, be genuine and be genuine to yourself, but don't let that tarnish your support for your child. So just follow where they're leading. They know where they're headed.
I'll pipe in here and say that an important thing to keep in mind, that if you are just entering into this world and it is strange and unusual and there's a lot of questions and fear from somebody who has been there and has lived the experience of parenting a transgender child, and now several years later, it is such a beautiful world. It is so, the experience really just opens your heart, and it helps you as an individual become a better person. So acknowledge, like Cindy said, your fears, but understand that many of us have been on the same path down the road. Just look back and think this is one of the greatest things that's ever happened to us.
Wow. I don't know if anyone else to say, but that was beautiful. That was just beautiful. That's a wonderful way to end. Well, thank you all so much for being here and for being vulnerable and talking about your situations to help other parents. I really appreciate it. this recording will be up on our YouTube and will be available for people on our website that people can help out, especially if somewhere down the line someone says, oh, I need that video because I have someone going through that. Please feel free to share at inspirechico.org. It will be there. And I just want to thank all of you once again for being available and talking about this such an important topic. So I appreciate all of you. And I appreciate all of our attendees, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night. All right.
Thanks, Les.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
everyone.